get our full-blown acceleration here in the manual mode. Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, we're gonna be going over a 2021 Dodge Challenger SXT all-wheel drive blacktop. But first and foremost, a huge shout out and thank you to the Dodge Ram here in Sandy for giving me some time with this Challenger. Check out their inventory in the link below. Let's get straight into the video. Under the hood of the Challenger, we have a naturally aspirated 3.6 liter V6 that goes through an 8-speed automatic transmission. Fuel economy is 18 around town and then 27 on the highway, with power outputs being 305 horsepower and then 268 pound-feet of torque. Now let's go over the front end of the SXT Challenger. So first and foremost, you guys can see on the hood there, you've got like the little fake fence, but I still think they look cool from an aesthetic perspective. And then popping down to the lights, yes, you do get the little LED halo lights, but you also do get the projector halogen bulbs as well with this. And then you can see everything's blacked out again as part of that blacktop package. And then you see the fog light just there at the very bottom with the splitter there as well. But other than that, you still have kind of like that signature aggressive muscle car look from the front end perspective. Coming around the side here, we've got two 35mm tires on 19-inch wheels in the front and over in the rear as well. As for the design on the wheels themselves, you've got this dark metallic gray, kind of like a basic design that most Chargers and Challengers have. You guys can see little Charger over there has the same exact wheels, but they look really good. And then you do have the blacked out gas cap there on the rear end. But other than that, here's your full side view on the Challenger. Pop into the trunk here of the Challenger. So for a muscle car, this has a ton of storage space in here. And then another cool little thing is you just have to kind of pull this tab back, kind of like really far back basically, and that's where the spare tire is going to live most of its life unless you get a flat here on the Challenger. But yeah, other than that, decent amount of storage space here in the trunk, and the opening is also pretty big, especially for a muscle car. I mean, you guys see the Mustang and the Camaro, and the openings on those are really small. Now let's go over the rest of the rear of the Challenger. So again, as part of this blacktop package, you guys can see you've got the all black spoiler here at the top, which looks really cool. And then you have these signature LED lights here at the rear end of the Challenger. And then you guys can see kind of like the squished exhaust tips there at the bottom. Well, the exhaust tip coverings there at the bottom. But yeah, other than that, I love how everything's blacked out with this blacktop package. And I think the rear end of the Challenger still looks really good. Just kind of like that old school muscle car aesthetic here in the back end. Here's the door panel at the front of the Challenger. Well, the only door panel because this is a two-door car. You guys can see that you've got the cloth trim here on the side of the door panel, and then you've got the leather trim just down below where you're actually going to rest your arms. And then you do have the little window controls and the mirror adjustments as well. And then here are the seats at the front. So you guys can see full cloth seats. You've got the houndstooth design there in the center portion of the seat. Really nice bolsters here on the seats as well. You got the power adjustment there for the backwards and forwards motion, the up and down, but then that little motion right there is manually adjustable. And let's actually pop the seatbelt through. So this is just like the little loop holder, and then there's a little handle right there. And then obviously the next thing you do is you just push the little seat forward. But here are the rear seats in the Challenger. For a muscle car, they've got a decent amount of space back there. But obviously, if we want to go back there, we just got to push that forward. And then I'm just going to squeeze the rest of the way. So if you just like barely move the seat, well, we kind of made it back here in one piece. Honestly, if I sit all the way up, I kind of like hit the ceiling. I'm 5'11". You guys can see legroom. It's okay. You really just, you want to have very minimal legs back here. And then you guys can see some vents. And then yes, you've got the little cup holder pull down. But again, I just want to mention for a muscle car, tons of storage space back here and good amount of seating room. As for the front, before we pop in, you guys can see the pedal layout here at the bottom with a little hood latch release. You've got your light controls right here. You've got a little trunk release right next to it, and then the steering wheel is manually adjustable. And there's one more look before we actually pop in. Now here's the steering wheel with the Challenger. You guys can see you've got soft touch leather there at the top, and then you got the perforated leather there on the sides. You get a little bit of a better grip on the steering wheel. Cruise control right there in that little area. And you got the controls for the center second or voice command controls. There are the radio controls just on the back of the steering wheel. And then you guys can see behind it, you got a little stalk for the turn signal and the windshield wipers. Other than that, pretty basic steering wheel. A little bit sad it doesn't have the paddle shifters, but I'll take it. Here's a center gauge cluster. I love the fact that everything's kind of like highlighted in red for the RPMs and the speed. I think it's just a cool little look in general. But as for the rest of the gauge cluster, pretty standard setup. Yes, you do get little performance stuff even in the base model Challenger, which I think is another nice little touch from Dodge. But yeah, pretty simple center stack, nothing too crazy. They've had this for a while in the cars basically. Now, here's the center infotainment system. First off, we're going to pop it into reverse. You guys can see there's a backup camera and the trajectory lines do turn with the steering wheel. Nothing too crazy with that. As for the rest of the infotainment system, it's just as responsive as the larger sized infotainment system. So there's nothing too crazy happening with this. You get like all the same controls, your heated seat controls, your climate controls, all that kind of stuff here with this infotainment system. The one thing that you do lose is you do not get the performance pages with this particular screen. You have to get the bigger screen to get that function. You can see just down below the infotainment system, we've got our analog controls for the radio. You've got your analog controls for the climate, and remember, it is a dual zone climate here in the Challenger. Then you got your stability control and then your sport mode. So when you do press the little sport mode button, it does pop up with a little flag there in the center screen letting you know that you are in the sport mode. Nothing too crazy with that, but that's that whole little control area. Now here's like the whole center console area. And again, you do have the shifter for the 8-speed automatic. It does have the manual shift function if you do want to shift the gears yourself, even though you don't have the paddle shifters per se. And then you guys can see we've got some cup holders here. We do have a center console, which it's very dark for some reason, but there's a 12 volt in there. There's a couple of USBs and an auxiliary, and then there's the little thread through there with the cable, so you can use all that. I love how the stitching like all goes in a line here on the Challenger. And then coming over to the glove box, you guys can see regular glove box lined with felt, and then it does say Challenger there on the vent, which is another nice little thing. Up top here we do have a sunglass holder, and then the Challenger does come with a sunroof as well. Just a regular sunroof, so it's just a manual shade that you can move one way or the other. And then the controls for the sunroof are right next to the light controls, and then you got a traditional mirror and then all black headliner. Now that we're done going to the interior here on the Challenger, let's quickly get into the pricing. So in terms of pricing, this Challenger stickers for about $36,000 before any type of market adjustment. That all being said, let's take this Challenger out and see how it drives. Quickly talk about visibility before we set off here in the Challenger, so you guys can see visibility of the hood. It is a longer hood, so it does take a second to get used to. Here's your visibility through both of the mirrors, and then here's all throughout the rear. So I would recommend, if you could get this car with blind spot monitoring, obviously it's an option you can get. I would recommend getting it, but that all being said, let's set off. We are initially setting off here in the Challenger, and I'm kind of starting here in the parking lot just to show you guys kind of like the maneuverability with the car itself. It's really easy to drive this car around, maneuver it, all that kind of stuff. You guys can see the steering is super light as well, so parking this car is not going to be an issue whatsoever. And initially getting up and going, definitely don't have a ton of travel there with the suspension, but it's really smooth on road. This definitely is more tuned towards the GT side. So I did mention this in my Shaker Challenger review that I feel like the Mustang and the Camaro are kind of like sport muscle cars, whereas this is more like a GT muscle car. So obviously it's a little bit of a heavier car, but it's definitely more like luxury tuned and all that kind of stuff. So you want something that just gives you kind of more of like a luxury car experience, and the Challenger is going to be the car for you. It's going to be a lot more comfortable, especially as like a daily driver. And this SXT having the all-wheel drive obviously makes this really practical from a daily driver perspective. Like today, it's actually going to snow, and this is a car that you could drive in the snow. Whereas if I was in any of the Mustangs or any of the Camaros, I wouldn't have that same comfort because they are only rear-wheel drive. And then the next little thing is just with the handling and the steering. Obviously, we're not able to drive too fast because we ran into a little bit of traffic. But I've driven enough of these Challengers to tell you that you can definitely feel the weight. It definitely, again, feels more like on the GT side, so definitely handles like it's a bigger car for sure. But the steering's pretty good. It's relatively direct. The front end, you don't feel a whole lot with it. But again, it's just kind of what this car's all about. And we'll get up a little bit so we can test our brakes out here. Yeah, so the brakes are really good. Stopping power on this car is really solid, as is here with this V6 all-wheel drive, so no complaints there. So getting up and going here, this is going to be our partial acceleration. where we are in the automatic mode so we can kind of see how it performs. You definitely have to wring the engine out a little bit. Obviously, driving that 6.4 Hemi kind of ruined me a little bit because, I mean, once you drive that, then they always say that with the Challengers, once you drive the bigger engines, you can't really go down after that point. But let's get our full-blown acceleration here in the manual mode. Yeah, so the gear shifts are really quick, and it's actually a decent amount of power. It gets up and goes at a really solid pace. And if we do a downshift there, yeah, it just does really good. This transmission is really responsive. The transmission definitely carries the engine in this car, since it doesn't have the 5.7 Hemi or the 6.4 Hemi, or obviously the supercharged 6.2 liter Hemi. But again, let's actually get into summing things up so I can kind of go over everything. So this is just a really cool car to me because it's like you can get this really cool looking car that for a lot of people, this is like their dream car, right? So many people have always wanted a Challenger, but it just doesn't make sense for a lot of people from a practicality standpoint, because it's like, okay, well, I want a Challenger, but I don't want a car that gets 2 miles per gallon. I want a Challenger, but I live in a place where it snows, and that's where this car really shines, and why I absolutely love this car is it's this cool all-weather Challenger you can drive all year round. It actually gets relatively good fuel economy for what it is, and so it's like the practical Challenger. And look at that, it's actually snowing, which is pretty funny. But yeah, that's where this car really shines, is it's just the practical Challenger. So if you want a more practical kind of like muscle car and you've always dreamed of getting this car, this is kind of like the way to get you into that, is with this all-wheel drive variant. That is going to sum things up for our video on this 2021 Dodge Challenger SXT blacktop all-wheel drive. And again, a huge shout out and thank you to the Dodge Ram here in Sandy for giving me some time with the Challenger. Check out their inventory in the link below. I'll see all of you in that next video.